The Texas sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty parking lot of the San Antonio rodeo grounds, turning the asphalt into a shimmering mirage. Jacob Miles sat in his truck, windows down, letting the hot September air wash over him as he stared at the arena in the distance. His calloused hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white despite the relaxed posture he tried to maintain. At 32 years old, he'd been riding bulls for nearly half his life, and every scar on his body told a story of near misses, hard landings, and the relentless pursuit of 8 seconds of glory. The dashboard clock read 3:15 in the afternoon. In less than 4 hours, he'd be climbing onto the back of a 2,000-pound animal bred for one purpose: to throw him off as violently as possible. His phone buzzed for the third time in 10 minutes. He knew without looking it was Sarah, his ex-wife. They'd been divorced for 2 years now, but she still checked in before his big rides, a habit that spoke to the complicated care that lingered between them despite everything that had fallen apart. Jacob finally picked up the phone. Her voice came through immediately, that familiar mixture of concern and frustration he knew so well. "You're really doing this again," she said. "It wasn't a question. It's what I do, Sarah. You know that." He watched a group of younger riders walking toward the practice pens, their swagger reminding him of himself a decade ago, before the injuries started piling up, before the doubt crept in. What you do is get yourself hurt. What you do is chase something that's been gone for years. There was a pause, and he could hear the television in the background, probably cartoons for their daughter Emma. "Emma wants to talk to you." Before he could respond, his 7-year-old daughter's voice filled his ear, bright and innocent. "Daddy, are you going to win tonight?" The tension in his shoulders eased slightly. "I'm going to try my best, sweetheart. You know how it goes. Mommy says you should stop riding bulls. She says you're getting too old." Jacob laughed despite himself. "Your mommy might be right about that. But Daddy's got a few more rides left in him. I'll see you this weekend, okay? We'll get ice cream. Promise?" "Promise." After he hung up, Jacob sat in silence for a long moment. The truth was, Sarah wasn't wrong. His body was breaking down. The knee injury from last year's fall in Oklahoma City still bothered him in cold weather. His lower back seized up most mornings before he'd even gotten out of bed. The doctor at the sports clinic in Austin had been blunt during his last visit. One more serious injury could end more than just his career. It could leave him permanently disabled. But quitting wasn't in his DNA. Bull riding was the only thing he'd ever been truly good at, the only arena where Jacob Miles felt like somebody. His father had been a ranch hand his whole life, working other people's land, dying at 53 with nothing to show for it but a worn-out body and unpaid medical bills. Jacob had promised himself he'd be different. He'd be somebody people remembered. The passenger door opened, startling him from his thoughts. Tommy Rodriguez slid in, his weathered face breaking into a grin. Tommy had been Jacob's traveling partner for 5 years, handling the logistics and coaching while Jacob focused on the rides. At 48, Tommy was too old and too banged up to compete himself anymore, but he knew the sport better than anyone Jacob had ever met. "You're brooding again," Tommy said, pulling out a crumpled schedule from his jacket pocket. "That's never a good sign before a ride. Just thinking. That's your first mistake. Thinking gets you hurt." Tommy unfolded the paper, scanning the evening's lineup. "You drew Diablo Rojo. That's good news and bad news." Jacob felt his stomach tighten. Diablo Rojo, Red Devil, was one of the rankest bulls on the circuit, a massive red Brahma cross with a spinning buck that had unseated 92% of the riders who'd tried him. But he was also a guaranteed high score if you could stay on. A successful 8 seconds on Diablo Rojo would put Jacob back in the conversation, back on the radar of the major sponsors and the big money events. "When did they post the draw?" Jacob asked. "About an hour ago. The kid from Nebraska, Tyler something, he's up first on Thunder Road. Then you've got Diablo Rojo in the 3rd spot. Prime time, right when the crowd's warmed up." Tommy folded the paper back into his pocket and looked at Jacob seriously. "You ready for this? Be honest with me." Jacob met his friend's gaze. The question hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning beyond just this one ride. It was really asking, "Are you still hungry enough? Do you still have what it takes? Or is it time to walk away while you still can?" "I'm ready," Jacob said, and he meant it. Whatever doubts plagued him in the quiet moments, whatever fears Sarah's calls stirred up, they all disappeared once he climbed into the chute. That was where everything made sense. They spent the next hour going through preparation routines that had become sacred rituals over the years. Jacob stretched in the shade behind his truck, working through the tightness in his hips and lower back. He taped his riding hand carefully, wrapping the athletic tape in precise layers that would give him grip without cutting off circulation. He pulled on his Kevlar vest, adjusting the straps until it sat snug against his ribs, then his leather chaps worn smooth from years of friction against bull hide. The arena was starting to fill up as they made their way through the competitors' entrance. The San Antonio Rodeo was one of the bigger stops on the regional circuit, not quite the prestige of the national finals in Las Vegas, but significant enough to draw serious riders and good prize money. The stands could hold about 8,000 people, and from the looks of the parking lot, they'd have close to capacity tonight. The smell hit Jacob as they entered the back area, a mixture of livestock, dirt, sweat, leather, and something else indefinable that existed only in rodeo arenas. It was a smell that meant home to him in a way his actual apartment never had. The holding pens were filled with bulls, some calm and almost docile-looking, others snorting and pawing at the ground with barely contained aggression. Jacob spotted Diablo Rojo immediately. The massive red bull stood apart from the others, his dark eyes tracking the movement of people with an unsettling intelligence. His horns curved up wickedly, and his muscled shoulders bunched with power. Jacob had drawn him once before, 3 years ago in Fort Worth, and had been thrown in less than 4 seconds. The bull had a signature move, a hard spin to the left out of the chute followed by a sudden reverse that caught riders leaning the wrong way. "He remembers you," Tommy said quietly, watching the bull watch Jacob. "Bulls don't remember individual riders. That's superstition." "Maybe. But he knows what he's doing in that chute, and he's damn good at it." Tommy checked his watch. "Let's get you signed in and get your number. Then you need to eat something, even if you don't feel like it. You're riding on an empty stomach and adrenaline, and that's a recipe for mistakes." The rider check-in was organized chaos. Cowboys of all ages milled around, some veterans like Jacob who'd been doing this for decades, others barely out of high school with stars in their eyes and no concept of how quickly this sport could chew you up. Jacob recognized several faces, nodded greetings to a few, but mostly kept to himself. Some riders were superstitious about talking before their rides. Others were naturally gregarious, using conversation to burn off nervous energy. Jacob fell somewhere in between, present but not quite engaged. He drew number 7. Tommy got him a pulled pork sandwich from one of the vendor stands, and Jacob forced himself to eat half of it while sitting on a hay bale near the practice pens. The sun was lower now, painting the arena in long shadows and golden light. The evening had that particular quality that only existed in September, when summer was dying but hadn't quite let go yet. At 6:30, the announcer's voice boomed through the speaker system, welcoming the crowd and running through the evening's sponsors. Jacob could hear the roar of the audience, that collective sound of excitement and anticipation that never failed to send a jolt of electricity through his system. This was what he lived for, not just the ride itself but this moment before it, when anything was possible, when he could still imagine a perfect 8 seconds. Se essa historia já mexicam você. Esse inscreva no canal deixo SCU like para neo perder nenhuma de nossas historias. The first rider was up, a kid who looked about 20, all lean muscle and confidence. Jacob watched on the monitor as the young rider nodded his head, the chute opened, and the bull exploded into the arena. The kid made it about 5 seconds before being thrown hard into the dirt. He got up quickly, waving to the crowd to show he was okay, but Jacob could see the limp as he jogged toward the fence. One by one, the riders went. Some made the 8 seconds, most didn't. The successful rides scored in the mid-80s, respectable but not spectacular. The crowd was enthusiastic, engaged, having a good time. This was entertainment for them, a glimpse into a world most would never understand. The willingness to climb onto an animal that outweighed you by more than 1,000 pounds and wanted nothing more than to send you flying. Then it was his turn. Jacob's name crackled through the speakers. "Next up, we've got a veteran of the sport, ladies and gentlemen. San Antonio's own Jacob Miles, riding the one and only Diablo Rojo." The crowd cheered, and Jacob felt Tommy's hand on his shoulder, grounding him. "You know what to do," Tommy said. "Stay centered, anticipate the spin, and don't get cocky. 8 seconds and you're done. Nothing fancy." Jacob nodded, barely hearing the words. His mind was already shifting into that focused state where everything else fell away. He approached the chute where Diablo Rojo waited, the massive bull shifting his weight from side to side, making the metal rails creak. Up close, the animal was even more intimidating, all raw power and barely controlled fury. He climbed onto the rails, and with help from the chute crew, carefully lowered himself onto the bull's broad back. The heat from the animal's body radiated through his jeans. He worked his gloved hand into the rope, wrapping it once, twice, getting the grip just right. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat distinct and measured. Time seemed to slow down in these final moments before the ride. Diablo Rojo shifted beneath him, and Jacob tightened his legs, finding his balance. He raised his left arm high, took 3 deep breaths and gave the nod. The chute burst open. The explosion of movement was instantaneous and violent. Diablo Rojo launched himself into the arena with a force that would have unseated a less experienced rider in the first second. Jacob's teeth rattled as the bull's front hooves hit the ground, his spine compressing with the impact before the massive animal kicked his hind legs toward the sky. The world tilted at impossible angles, dirt, lights, crowd, all blurring into a chaotic swirl of sensation. Jacob gripped hard with his riding hand, his left arm pumping for balance as muscle memory took over. Diablo Rojo spun hard to the left, exactly as Jacob had anticipated, and he leaned into the rotation, his body moving with the bull's momentum rather than fighting against it. 3 seconds gone. The crowd noise was a distant roar beneath the sound of his own blood pumping in his ears, and the grunting breath of the massive animal beneath him. Then came the reversal. Diablo Rojo planted his front legs and spun viciously to the right, his powerful hindquarters whipping around with stunning speed. Jacob felt his balance shift, felt himself sliding fractionally to the left side of the bull's back. He tried to correct, squeezing harder with his thighs, but the bull was already into his next move, a high, twisting buck that sent both of them airborne. 5 seconds. Jacob could feel it slipping away. His seat was off, his center of gravity too far forward. Diablo Rojo landed hard and kicked again, and this time Jacob felt his hand slip in the rope. His left arm windmilled desperately, searching for balance that wasn't there anymore. The bull spun again, a savage rotation that finally broke Jacob's grip completely. 6 seconds. He was flying, suspended in midair for a moment that seemed to last forever. Training kicked in. Tuck your chin, protect your head, try to land on your feet or roll if you can't. But Diablo Rojo was still moving beneath him, still bucking and spinning, and Jacob realized with crystalline clarity that he was going to land badly. His back hit the ground first, driving the air from his lungs in an explosive whoosh. Pain radiated through his spine and shoulders. The arena dirt was hard-packed despite its loose surface, and the impact sent shockwaves through his entire body. He tried to roll away, tried to get his bearings and scramble to safety, but his body wasn't responding the way it should. Then he saw it, Diablo Rojo's massive hind legs, still kicking, still bucking, directly above him. The bull's rear hoof came down with devastating precision, catching Jacob on the left side of his head, just above his ear. The sound was a sickening thud that somehow cut through all the noise of the arena. White light exploded across Jacob's vision, followed immediately by darkness creeping in from the edges. He was aware of screaming, the crowd, or maybe his own voice, he couldn't tell. The bullfighters were there suddenly, their bright jerseys filling his narrowing field of vision as they worked to draw Diablo Rojo away from his motionless body. Jacob tried to move, tried to get up the way he always did, but his limbs felt disconnected, like they belonged to someone else. Tommy was the first face he focused on, his friend's weathered features twisted with fear as he dropped to his knees in the dirt beside him. "Don't move, don't move, don't move," Tommy was saying, his hands hovering over Jacob but not touching him, clearly afraid of making things worse. "Medic! We need a medic now." Jacob tried to speak but couldn't form words. His vision was doubling, then tripling. The arena lights above seemed impossibly bright, boring into his skull like lasers. He could taste blood in his mouth. He must have bitten his tongue during the fall. The pain in his head was unlike anything he'd ever experienced, a throbbing agony that seemed to pulse with each heartbeat, building in intensity rather than fading. The rodeo medics arrived within seconds, a team that had seen their share of injuries and knew how to move fast. A woman's face appeared above him, professional and calm despite the urgency of her movements. She was checking his pupils with a penlight, asking him questions he couldn't quite process. He felt a cervical collar being fitted around his neck, hands carefully stabilizing his head. "Jacob, can you hear me? I need you to stay still. Can you tell me where you hurt?" The medic's voice seemed to come from very far away. He tried to answer, manage something that might have been words. The pain was getting worse, expanding through his skull like a living thing. He felt nauseous, the pulled pork sandwich from earlier threatening to come back up. Possible skull fracture, definite concussion, maybe worse. The medic was saying to someone else. "We need to get him to University Hospital now. Call ahead, tell them we're coming in with a head trauma." They were lifting him onto a backboard, strapping him down with practiced efficiency. The movement sent fresh waves of agony through his head and neck. Above him, the arena lights swam in and out of focus. He could hear the announcer trying to keep the crowd calm, assuring everyone that Jacob was receiving medical attention, that this was why they had the best emergency response team in the state. Tommy's face appeared again as they were loading him into the ambulance that waited at the arena's edge. His friend looked older than Jacob had ever seen him, the fear naked in his eyes. "You're gonna be okay, brother. You hear me? You're tough as they come. I'm calling Sarah, and I'll be right behind you." The ambulance doors closed, sealing Jacob in a sterile world of beeping monitors and fluorescent lights. A paramedic worked over him, checking vitals, starting in 4-line in his arm. Jacob felt consciousness slipping away, the darkness at the edges of his vision spreading inward like ink in water. "Stay with me, Jacob," the paramedic said firmly. "Keep your eyes open. Tell me about your daughter. You have a daughter, right?" "Emma," Jacob managed to whisper, the effort exhausting. 7. "That's great. What does Emma like to do?" "Ice cream," Jacob said, each word a struggle. "Promised ice cream. You'll get her that ice cream. But you need to stay awake for me right now, okay?" The siren wailed as they raced through San Antonio's evening traffic. Jacob tried to focus on the paramedic's voice, on the questions about Emma and Sarah, and anything that would keep him tethered to consciousness. But the pull of darkness was strong, and the pain was becoming almost abstract, something happening to someone else far away. Time became elastic and strange. He was vaguely aware of arriving at the hospital, of being rushed through bright corridors on the gurney, of voices speaking urgently around him using medical terminology he didn't understand. Someone was cutting away his vest and shirt. Hands were touching him, examining him, while machines beeped and whirred. A doctor's face appeared, younger than Jacob expected, with serious eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Mr. Miles, I'm Dr. Chun. You've sustained a significant head injury. We're going to do a CT scan to see what we're dealing with. Do you understand?" Jacob tried to nod, but the collar prevented it. "Okay," he managed. They wheeled him into another room dominated by a large machine. The technicians positioned him carefully, spoke to him through an intercom, told him to hold still. The machine hummed and clicked, capturing images of what was happening inside his skull. Jacob closed his eyes despite the instructions to stay awake, the fluorescent lights too bright, too painful. He must have lost time because suddenly he was back in a regular room, no longer on the hard backboard. The cervical collar was still in place, and he was attached to what seemed like dozens of wires and tubes. The pain in his head had been reduced to a manageable roar by whatever drugs they'd pumped into him, but he could feel it lurking beneath the pharmaceutical haze, waiting. Sarah was there, sitting in a chair by his bed, her face pale and drawn. When she saw his eyes open, relief flooded her features, followed quickly by anger. "You stupid, stupid man," she said, her voice breaking. "They said if that hoof had hit you an inch to the left, you'd be dead." "An inch, Jacob." "Sarah." His voice came out as a croak. "Don't. Just don't." She stood, came closer but didn't touch him. "Dr. Chin said you have a skull fracture, a severe concussion, and swelling in your brain. They're going to have to do surgery to relieve the pressure." "Surgery, Jacob. They're going to cut open your head because you can't let go of this death wish you have." "Not a death wish," he said weakly. "It's what I do. It's what you did. Past tense. Because I swear to God, if you survive this and try to get back on a bull, I will personally make sure you never see Emma again. I'll get a lawyer, I'll get a court order, whatever it takes. She's not going to watch her father kill himself 8 seconds at a time." The words hit harder than Diablo Rojo's hoof. Jacob wanted to argue, to defend himself, but he didn't have the energy. And a small voice in the back of his mind whispered that maybe she was right. Maybe it was time. Maybe this was the universe telling him in the most direct way possible that his time was up. Dr. Chin entered the room, tablet in hand, his expression professionally neutral. "Mr. Miles, glad to see you're conscious. Your wife and I were just discussing your condition while you were in imaging." "Ex-wife," Sarah corrected automatically, but her hand found Jacob's and squeezed. "Right, apologies. So here's the situation. The CT scan shows a linear skull fracture on the left temporal bone. That's where the hoof made contact. You also have what we call an epidural hematoma, which is bleeding between your skull and the outer membrane covering your brain. The blood is creating pressure, and if we don't relieve it, you could have a stroke or worse." Jacob processed this through the fog of painkillers and pain. Surgery? We need to do what's called a craniotomy. We'll remove a section of skull temporarily to access the hematoma, evacuate the blood, and repair any damaged vessels. It's a serious procedure, but it's necessary, and the sooner we do it, the better your chances of a full recovery. And if I don't do it? Dr. Chen's expression hardened slightly. Then you'll likely die within the next 24 hours, if not sooner. The pressure will continue to build until your brain herniates. I don't mean to be blunt, but you need to understand the severity of this. Sarah's hand tightened on his. He'll do the surgery. I need to hear it from him, Dr. Chen said. Jacob looked at Sarah, really looked at her for the first time since she'd arrived. He saw the fear in her eyes, the exhaustion, the lingering love mixed with exasperation that had defined their relationship even before the divorce. He thought about Emma, about the promise of ice cream, about all the other promises he'd made and broken over the years in pursuit of 8 seconds that never seemed to be enough. Do it, he said finally. Dr. Chen nodded, already pulling out paperwork. We'll prep you for surgery immediately. The nurse will be in shortly to go over everything and get your consent forms signed. Any questions before then? How long until I can ride again? The question hung in the air. Sarah's hand released his, and she turned away, her shoulders shaking. Dr. Chen looked at him for a long moment, and Jacob saw something like pity in the young doctor's eyes. Mr. Miles, you're going to be lucky if you can walk normally again, let alone ride bulls. One thing at a time. Let's focus on saving your life first. After Dr. Chen left, Sarah turned back to him. Her face was wet with tears. You heard him. You heard what he said. And your first question is about riding again. Sarah. No, I'm done. I can't do this anymore, Jacob. I can't watch you destroy yourself. I'll stay until you're out of surgery, because Emma would never forgive me if I didn't. But after that, she wiped her eyes roughly. After that, you need to figure out who you are without a bull underneath you. Because this person who would rather die than give up 8 seconds of glory? I don't know him anymore. She left the room, and Jacob was alone with the beeping machines and the dull roar of pain beneath the medications. A nurse came in, efficiently going through pre-op procedures, explaining what would happen, getting his signature on forms that swam before his eyes. Tommy appeared briefly, red-eyed and gruff, squeezing Jacob's shoulder without words. They wheeled him toward the operating room as the sun was setting outside, casting long shadows through the hospital windows. Jacob watched the ceiling tiles pass overhead, counting them absently, and wondered if this was what his father had seen in his final days, lying in a hospital bed, his body broken from a lifetime of hard work that no one would remember. The last thing Jacob saw before the anesthesia took him was the operating room lights, bright and cold, and so similar to the arena lights he'd spent his life chasing. Then everything went dark, and he fell into a dreamless void where bulls and rodeos and the sound of crowds didn't exist. Jacob swam back to consciousness slowly, as if rising through deep, murky water. The first thing he became aware of was the pain, a deep, throbbing ache that seemed to encompass his entire head, different from before but no less intense. The second thing was the beeping of monitors, steady and rhythmic, somehow both annoying and comforting in their reliability. He tried to open his eyes, but his eyelids felt weighted down, reluctant to obey. When he finally managed to force them open, the world came into focus gradually. He was in a hospital room, but different from the one before surgery. This one was quieter, more subdued. The lights were dimmed. Through the window, he could see darkness outside, though whether it was the same night or another one entirely, he had no idea. A nurse noticed him stirring and approached the bed, her smile professional but warm. Welcome back, Mr. Miles. How are you feeling? Terrible, Jacob croaked, his throat raw and dry. That's to be expected. The surgery went well. Dr. Chen will be in to see you soon. But the short version is that we evacuated the hematoma and there were no complications. You're in the ICU now, where we can monitor you closely for the next few days. She helped him take small sips of water, which felt like heaven on his parched throat. His head was wrapped in bandages, he realized, his left side entirely covered. When he tried to lift his hand to touch the dressings, the nurse gently stopped him. Best not to touch just yet. Everything is healing as it should. The swelling in your brain has gone down significantly, which is excellent news. How long? Jacob asked. You've been out for about 18 hours. The surgery was last night, and it's now late morning. Your friend Tommy has been in the waiting room the whole time. Would you like to see him? Jacob nodded, which was a mistake. Pain lanced through his skull at the movement. He grimaced, and the nurse adjusted something on his fore. I'm giving you a bit more pain medication. You need to keep your movement minimal for now. No sudden motions, no getting up without assistance, understood. Tommy appeared a few minutes later, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His clothes were rumpled, his usually neat hair disheveled, and relief washed over his face when he saw Jacob awake. You scared the hell out of me, brother, Tommy said, sinking into the chair beside the bed. I've seen a lot of bad wrecks over the years, but that one. He trailed off, shaking his head. I made it to 6 seconds, Jacob said, attempting a weak smile. 6.5, actually. Not that it matters. The Rodeo Association is calling it a freak accident, but everyone saw what happened. That kick was brutal, man. Diablo Rojo got pulled from the rest of the rotation. They're saying he's too dangerous. It wasn't his fault. I landed wrong, couldn't get clear. Tommy leaned forward, his weathered hands gripping the bed rail. Jacob, we need to talk about what comes next. Not you too. Yeah, me too. Sarah told me what you asked Dr. Chun, about when you could ride again. Are you out of your mind? You just had brain surgery. They cut open your skull. People come back from injuries, Jacob said stubbornly, even though the words felt hollow even to him. It's part of the sport. Not from injuries like this. Not at your age. Not with your history. Tommy stood, pacing the small room. Listen, I've been thinking about this all night. I've been enabling you, pushing you to keep going because I live vicariously through your rides now that I can't compete myself. But I can't do it anymore. If you try to get back on a bull, you're doing it without me. The words stung more than Jacob expected. You're abandoning me? I'm trying to save your life. There's a difference. Tommy stopped pacing, met Jacob's eyes directly. You've got a daughter who needs her father alive and functional. You've got years ahead of you if you don't throw them away chasing something that's already gone. The question is, what are you going to do with those years? Before Jacob could respond, Dr. Chun entered, reading from his tablet. Mr. Miles, good to see you awake and alert. All your vital signs look stable, which is exactly what we want to see post-op. How's your pain level 1 to 10? 7, Jacob admitted. We can adjust your medication. Any nausea, vision problems, numbness in your extremities? Vision's a bit blurry, but everything else seems okay. Dr. Chun conducted a quick neurological exam, checking Jacob's reflexes, asking him to follow a finger with his eyes, testing his grip strength. He nodded with apparent satisfaction. Everything looks good for this stage of recovery. Now, I want to be very clear about what the next few months are going to look like. You'll be here in the ICU for at least 3 more days while we monitor for any complications. Then you'll move to a regular room for probably another week. After discharge, you'll need extensive physical therapy and cognitive rehabilitation. How long until I'm back to normal? Jacob asked. Define normal. If you mean returning to daily activities, driving a car, taking care of yourself, we're looking at 3 to 6 months with diligent therapy. If you mean going back to professional bull riding. Dr. Chun paused, choosing his words carefully. That's not going to happen, Mr. Miles. I need you to understand this completely. The trauma you sustained would be career-ending for any athlete, but for a bull rider? It's out of the question. You don't know that for sure. Actually, I do. The skull fracture will heal, but you'll always have a weak point there. Another significant blow to that area would likely be fatal. You also have to consider the cognitive effects. You have a severe concussion on top of the structural damage. You'll have headaches, possibly for years. You'll be more susceptible to future concussions. Your balance and coordination will be affected during recovery and possibly longer. Dr. Chun sat down, his demeanor shifting from doctor to something more personal. I've treated several professional athletes in my career. I understand what it's like when your identity is wrapped up in your sport. But I'm telling you as plainly as I can that returning to bull riding would be suicide. Not figuratively. Literally. The room fell silent except for the beeping of monitors. Tommy stood by the window, arms crossed. Dr. Chun waited patiently for his words to sink in. Jacob stared at the ceiling, feeling the weight of reality settling onto him like a physical thing, crushing and inescapable. What am I supposed to do? He asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. That's a question for you to figure out, with help from your family and friends. But figuring it out alive is better than the alternative. Dr. Chun stood. I'll be back to check on you this evening. Try to rest, let your body heal. After the doctor left, Tommy returned to the chair. He's right, you know. About all of it. I know, Jacob admitted, the words tasting like defeat. I just don't know who I am without this. Then you've got time to figure it out. And you won't be doing it alone. The days in the ICU blurred together in a haze of medication, monitoring, and slow, incremental improvements. Sarah visited once, bringing Emma despite her earlier anger. The sight of his daughter's frightened face when she saw him covered in bandages, hooked up to machines, broke something in Jacob that the accident itself hadn't managed to touch. "Does it hurt, Daddy?" Emma asked, her small hand carefully avoiding all the medical equipment as she reached toward him. "A little bit, sweetheart. But I'm getting better. Mommy says you can't ride bulls anymore." Jacob glanced at Sarah, who stood by the door with her arms wrapped around herself defensively. "Mommy's probably right about that." "Good," Emma said with the simple certainty of a child. "Bulls are mean. You should do something else." "Like what?" Emma thought about this seriously. "You could work at my school. Or at the ice cream place. Then we could have ice cream all the time." Despite everything, Jacob laughed, then winced as the movement sent pain through his head. "Those are good ideas. I'll think about them." After they left, promising to visit again soon, Jacob found himself truly alone with his thoughts for the first time since the accident. The truth was, he had no idea what came next. Bull riding had been his entire adult life, his identity, his purpose. Without it, he felt hollow, like a house with all the furniture removed, just empty rooms echoing with absence. He thought about his father, dying in a hospital not unlike this one, his last words to teenage Jacob bitter and resigned. "Don't end up like me, boy. Be somebody." Jacob had interpreted that as permission to chase glory, to risk everything for a chance at recognition. But lying here now, his head wrapped in bandages and his future uncertain, he wondered if his father had meant something different. Maybe being somebody didn't mean being famous or successful in the eyes of others. Maybe it just meant being present, being there for the people who loved you. The transition to a regular room came after 4 days. Jacob was making good progress, the doctors said, better than they'd expected. His strength was returning, though his balance was still off, and the headaches came in waves that left him nauseous and disoriented. A physical therapist started working with him, simple exercises at first, sitting up without assistance, standing with a walker, taking a few steps around the room. Tommy visited every day, bringing updates from the rodeo world that Jacob had asked him to stop sharing after the first few. Hearing about other riders, about events he was missing, about the circuit moving on without him, was too painful. Instead, they talked about other things: Tommy's daughter's upcoming wedding, the ranch Tommy's family owned back in New Mexico, the possibility of training young riders instead of competing. "I've been thinking," Tommy said during one of these visits. "My dad's getting too old to run the ranch by himself. He's been talking about bringing someone in to help manage things, maybe teach some riding clinics for local kids. Room and board, decent salary, health insurance. It's not the glory of the professional circuit, but it's honest work." Jacob looked at his friend, trying to read between the lines. "You're offering me a job? I'm offering you an option. Something to think about while you're recovering. No pressure, no timeline. Just think about it." The offer hung in Jacob's mind over the following days as he slowly regained his mobility. Physical therapy sessions grew longer and more challenging. A young therapist named Marcus, built like a linebacker but with the patience of a saint, guided Jacob through exercises designed to retrain his brain and body to work together again. The neural pathways got scrambled a bit, Marcus explained as Jacob struggled to walk in a straight line with his eyes closed. "We're essentially teaching your brain to trust your body again. It's going to feel frustrating, like you should be able to do things that seem simple. But you have to be patient with the process." Patience had never been Jacob's strong suit. He pushed too hard in one session and ended up vomiting from vertigo, then spent the next day confined to bed with blinding headaches. Dr. Chen wasn't sympathetic. "This isn't a competition, Mr. Miles. There's no prize for recovering faster than the recommended pace. In fact, pushing too hard can set you back weeks or even cause permanent damage. So unless you want to spend the rest of your life dealing with chronic migraines and balance issues, I suggest you listen to your therapists and follow the protocols we've established." The reprimand stung, but it was effective. Jacob forced himself to slow down, to accept that healing was its own kind of challenge, different from but no less demanding than the 8 seconds he used to chase. Sarah visited more frequently as the days passed, her initial anger softening into something more complex. They had long conversations during these visits, the kind they hadn't managed during their marriage, when Jacob was always on the road and Sarah was home trying to hold everything together. "I blamed you for a long time," Sarah admitted one afternoon, sitting in the chair that had become familiar, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup from the hospital cafeteria. "For choosing the rodeo over us, over Emma. But I'm realizing now that it wasn't really a choice. It was more like an addiction, or a compulsion you couldn't control." "That's not an excuse," Jacob said quietly. "No, it's not. But it helps me understand. And now that the choice has been made for you, by circumstances instead of your own will, maybe there's a chance for you to figure out who you are without it." "I'm scared," Jacob admitted, the words coming out before he could stop them. "I'm 32 years old and I have no idea what to do with my life. No college degree, no real skills outside of riding bulls and working ranch jobs. How am I supposed to support Emma, be the father she deserves, when I'm starting from zero?" Sarah set down her coffee and reached across to take his hand, the gesture surprising both of them. "You're not starting from zero. You're starting from experience. You know hard work, you know discipline, you know how to get up after being knocked down. Even if it took you too long to realize when to stay down. Those things matter, Jacob. They count for something. Tommy offered me a job on his family's ranch in New Mexico. Managing the place, teaching riding clinics to kids. That sounds perfect for you. Does it? Teaching kids to do the same thing that put me here." Sarah considered this. Teaching them to do it safely, with proper respect for the danger. Teaching them that it's okay to walk away when it's time. Maybe that's exactly what you're supposed to do. The conversation stayed with Jacob after Sarah left. He found himself actually considering the future for the first time in years. Not just the next ride, the next competition, the next 8 seconds, but actual long-term thinking. What did he want his life to look like in 5 years? In 10? What did he want Emma to remember about her father? 2 weeks after the accident, Jacob was discharged from the hospital. Tommy drove him to a recovery facility in Austin that specialized in brain injury rehabilitation. The place was quiet, professional, designed for people recovering from strokes, car accidents, and in Jacob's case, professional stupidity, as he'd started calling it. The routine was strict and exhausting. Physical therapy twice a day, cognitive exercises to rebuild his memory and concentration, occupational therapy to relearn basic tasks that his brain now struggled with. Some days he couldn't remember simple words. Other days his hands wouldn't cooperate with tasks like buttoning a shirt or writing his name. The headaches were constant, ranging from dull background noise to piercing agony that left him curled up in his room with the lights off. But slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, things improved. By the 3rd week he could walk without assistance, though his gait was still uneven. By the 4th he could read for more than 20 minutes without losing focus. The headaches became less frequent, less severe. His coordination returned gradually, his hands remembering how to do the things his brain had forgotten. Other patients in the facility became familiar faces. There was Margaret, a 70-year-old recovering from a stroke, who beat Jacob at cards with gleeful regularity despite her partial paralysis. Daniel, a college student who'd nearly died in a car accident, practicing his speech therapy with the determination of someone who'd been given a second chance. Rosa, a chef recovering from a fall in her restaurant, slowly regaining the fine motor control she needed to return to her kitchen. They shared meals in the common area, swapped stories about their progress and setbacks, formed the kind of bonds that only people going through similar struggles can forge. For the first time in years, Jacob felt part of a community that had nothing to do with competition or proving himself. These people didn't care about his ranking on the circuit or how many seconds he'd stayed on bulls. They cared about whether he'd managed to tie his shoes that morning or remembered what day it was. 6 weeks after the accident, Dr. Chen visited the facility for a follow-up evaluation. The checkup was thorough. Neurological tests, another CT scan, consultations with the facility's medical staff. Jacob waited anxiously for the results, aware that this evaluation would determine much about his future. "The healing is remarkable," Dr. Chen said, reviewing the scans on his tablet. "The skull fracture is mending well, the surgical site shows no signs of infection or complications, and the brain swelling has resolved completely. You've done excellent work in therapy. Your progress reports are impressive. So I'm cleared for normal activity?" Jacob asked. "Define normal." "You're cleared to return home, to resume most daily activities. You can drive again, though I recommend starting slowly and avoiding long distances until you're completely confident. You can work within reason. But I want to be very clear about the limitations." Dr. Chen pulled up a comparison of Jacob's scans, before and after. "See this area here? That's where we performed the craniotomy. The bone has healed, but it will never be as strong as it was. You need to avoid contact sports, anything with a high risk of head injury. That includes bull riding, I know. Not just bull riding. Boxing, football, even things like heading a soccer ball. Your brain has been through significant trauma, and while it's healed remarkably well, you don't get unlimited chances. Another serious concussion could cause permanent cognitive damage, personality changes, even death. Jacob nodded slowly, the reality settling over him with final, absolute weight. It was truly over. Not might be over, not probably over, but definitively, permanently over. The life he'd known, the identity he'd built, the dream he'd chased, all of it was behind him now, whether he was ready or not. I understand, he said finally. Good. I'm going to clear you for discharge at the end of the week. You'll continue with outpatient therapy for at least another 3 months, and I want to see you for follow-ups every month for the next year. Any questions? Yeah. What happens if I don't follow the restrictions? If I decide to ride again? Dr. Chen closed his tablet and looked at Jacob with absolute seriousness. Then you'll likely die, and I'll have wasted a lot of very skilled surgical work saving your life. More importantly, your daughter will grow up without a father. Is that the legacy you want to leave? The bluntness of the question hit Jacob harder than any of the gentler warnings had. No, he said quietly. No, it's not. On his last night at the facility, the other patients threw him an impromptu going-away gathering in the common room. Rosa had somehow convinced the kitchen staff to make a real meal instead of the usual bland hospital fare. Margaret had decorated with crepe paper and balloons she'd folded herself despite her limited mobility. Daniel made a toast, his speech still slightly slurred but his sentiment clear. To Jacob, who reminded us that cowboys can be humble too. May your next chapter be as badass as your last one, just with fewer head injuries. They laughed and ate and told stories, and Jacob felt something shift inside him. These people had seen him at his lowest, had watched him struggle with tasks a child could do, had witnessed his frustration and fear and determination. And they'd celebrated his victories, the first day he walked without help, the first time he beat Margaret at cards, the day he finally remembered all their names without prompting. Maybe this was what being somebody really meant. Not fame or rankings or 8 seconds of glory, but showing up every day, doing the work, being present for the people around you. It wasn't the legacy Jacob had imagined for himself, but sitting in that common room surrounded by people who'd become friends, he thought maybe it was enough. Tommy picked him up the next morning, loading Jacob's few belongings into the truck. The drive to San Antonio was quiet at first, both men lost in their own thoughts. The Texas landscape rolled past, flat plains giving way to rolling hills, the autumn colors just beginning to show in the scattered trees. I've been thinking about your dad's offer, Jacob said finally. About the ranch in New Mexico. Tommy glanced over at him. Yeah, I want to do it. If the offer's still open. It's open. Dad will be thrilled, honestly. He's been running himself ragged, trying to keep up with everything. I don't know anything about managing a ranch, Jacob admitted. I've worked them, but that's different from running one. You'll learn. Dad's a good teacher, and he's not expecting you to know everything from day one. Plus, the riding clinics for kids, that's all you. You've got more experience on bulls than anyone else in the county. Teaching kids to ride bulls when I almost died doing it seems irresponsible. Tommy was quiet for a moment, navigating around a slow-moving truck. Or maybe you're exactly the right person to teach them. You know the risks, you know the price of pushing too hard, you know what it's like to have to walk away. That's valuable knowledge, Jacob. Don't discount it. They stopped for lunch at a roadside diner, the kind of place that hadn't changed in 40 years, with worn vinyl booths and a menu that was probably older than both of them. Over chicken fried steak and coffee, they talked about logistics. When Jacob would move, what the job would entail, living arrangements on the ranch. There's a foreman's house that's been empty for a couple years, Tommy explained. 2 bedrooms, nothing fancy, but it's got good bones. You'd have privacy, your own space. And it's big enough that Emma could stay with you on weekends if Sarah agrees to it. The mention of Emma brought up something Jacob had been avoiding thinking about. I need to have a real conversation with her. With both of them. About what comes next, about me being in Emma's life more consistently. Sarah seems open to it. She's seen the work you've done, the changes you're making. Seeing is different from trusting. I've let them down a lot over the years. Then don't let them down anymore. It's that simple and that hard. After lunch, they continued toward San Antonio. Jacob had asked Tommy to drive past the rodeo grounds, unsure why he needed to see it, but knowing that he did. They pulled into the parking lot where, just 2 months ago, Jacob had sat in his truck preparing for what would be his last ride. The place looked different now, smaller somehow. There was no event scheduled, so the lot was mostly empty. The arena sat quiet, the stands vacant, all the noise and energy and excitement that had filled it that night reduced to memory and echoes. "You want to go in?" Tommy asked. Jacob shook his head. "No. I just needed to see it, to make it real somehow." They sat there for a few minutes, the truck engine ticking as it cooled. Jacob looked at the arena and tried to feel something, regret, longing, anger, anything. But all he felt was a quiet sense of closure, like finishing a book and setting it back on the shelf. "I'm ready," he said finally. "Let's go home." Tommy started the truck and pulled back onto the road. Jacob watched the arena disappear in the side mirror, getting smaller and smaller until it was just another building in a landscape full of them. He thought about Diablo Rojo, that massive red bull, and wondered if the animal ever thought about the riders it had thrown, or if each one was just another challenge, another few seconds of instinct and power, quickly forgotten. Maybe that was the lesson Jacob had been too stubborn to learn. That in the grand scheme of things, those 8 seconds didn't matter as much as he'd always believed. What mattered was everything that came before and after. The preparation, the recovery, the people who cared enough to wait for you at the hospital, the daughter who just wanted her father to be safe and present. Se essa historia já mexicam você. Esse inscreva no canal e deixo seu, like para neo perder nenhuma de nossas historias. Sarah's house was in a quiet suburb on the north side of San Antonio, a modest single-story with a small yard where Emma's swing set stood. Tommy pulled into the driveway, and Jacob felt his stomach tighten with nervousness. "Want me to come in?" Tommy offered. "No, this is something I need to do alone. Thanks for everything, brother." "I mean it." Tommy gripped his shoulder firmly. "You've got my number. Call me when you're ready to head up to New Mexico. No rush, take the time you need here first." Sarah answered the door, surprise and something else, hope maybe, crossing her face. "Jacob, I wasn't expecting you today." "I know. I should have called. Is Emma here?" "She's in her room doing homework." "Come in." The house was exactly as Jacob remembered it, filled with evidence of Emma's presence. Drawings on the refrigerator, toys in a basket by the couch, photos on the walls charting her growth from baby to 7-year-old. Jacob realized with a pang how many of those photos he'd missed being present for. Sarah called for Emma, who came running down the hallway and threw herself at Jacob with the unself-conscious enthusiasm of a child. He caught her carefully, mindful of his still-healing head, and held her tight. "Daddy, are you all better now?" "Getting there, sweetheart. Can we talk?" "All 3 of us." They sat in the living room, Emma between her parents on the couch, sensing that something important was about to be said. Jacob took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "Emma, I need to apologize to you. I haven't been the father you deserve. I've been chasing something that I thought was important, but I was wrong. What's really important is you, being here for you, being someone you can count on." Emma's face was serious, more serious than any 7-year-olds should have to be. "Does that mean you're not going to ride bulls anymore?" "That's exactly what it means. I can't ride anymore, even if I wanted to. But the truth is I don't want to. I want to be your dad, not just sometimes, but all the time. Like other kids' dads? Who come to school things and help with homework." The innocence of the question broke Jacob's heart. "Yeah, exactly like that. I'm going to be moving to New Mexico for a job, working on a ranch, but it's not far. I want you to come visit on weekends, spend time there with me. Would you like that?" Emma looked at Sarah, seeking permission or reassurance. Sarah nodded gently. "Will there be horses?" Emma asked. "Lots of horses. And cows. And I might be teaching kids how to ride, so maybe I could teach you too, if your mom says it's okay." "Horses," Sarah said firmly. "Not bulls." "Definitely not bulls," Jacob agreed. "Just horses. Nice, calm horses." Emma seemed to consider this seriously. "Okay. Can I bring my stuffed animals?" "They'd like the ranch." "You can bring whatever you want, sweetheart." After Emma went back to her homework, satisfied with this new arrangement, Jacob and Sarah sat in the kitchen over coffee. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the tile floor. "Thank you," Jacob said, "for not shutting me out, for giving me another chance." "I'm doing this for Emma, not for you," Sarah said, but her tone was gentle. "But I'm also doing it because I can see that you've changed. Or maybe that you're trying to change, which is all anyone can really ask. I wasted a lot of years, Sarah, chasing something that was never going to be enough, never going to fill whatever was empty inside me. And now I'm going to figure out how to fill it with things that actually matter. Family, honest work, being present. It's not glamorous, it's not going to make me famous, but maybe that was never the point. Sarah reached across the table and squeezed his hand briefly. Maybe not. For what it's worth, I think this job in New Mexico is good for you. Fresh start, new purpose. Just promise me you'll actually follow through this time. I promise. No more broken promises, Sarah. Not to you, not to Emma, not to myself. He left as the sun was setting, the sky painted in oranges and purples that seemed almost too vivid to be real. Emma hugged him goodbye at the door, already making plans for her first visit to the ranch, already imagining the horses she'd ride and the adventures she'd have. Driving away, Jacob felt lighter than he had in months, maybe years. The weight of expectation, of maintaining an image, of living up to some impossible standard he'd set for himself, all of it was lifting, dissolving in the Texas twilight. The Rodriguez family ranch sat in the high desert of southern New Mexico, 30 miles outside of Las Cruces, where the land rolled in gentle waves of brown and gold beneath an impossibly blue sky. Jacob arrived on a crisp October morning, his truck loaded with the few possessions he'd accumulated during his recovery. Clothes, a few books, photos of Emma, and not much else. He'd sold most of his rodeo gear, keeping only a single championship buckle from his best year. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder of where he'd been and how far he'd come. Tommy's father, Miguel Rodriguez, was a compact man in his mid-70s, with weathered brown skin and eyes that missed nothing. He met Jacob at the main house, a sprawling adobe structure that had been in the Rodriguez family for 3 generations. "So you're the cowboy who's too stubborn to die," Miguel said, shaking Jacob's hand with a grip that was surprisingly strong. "Tommy's told me about you. Says you're a hard worker when you're not being an idiot." Jacob couldn't help but laugh. "That's fair. Come, I'll show you the place." The ranch sprawled across 1,500 acres of high desert, home to about 300 head of cattle, 24 horses, and an assortment of chickens, goats, and one cantankerous donkey named Cisco who Miguel swore was the best guard animal on the property. The foreman's house sat about a quarter mile from the main house, a small adobe building with a covered porch and views that stretched to the mountains in the distance. "It needs some work," Miguel admitted as they toured the dusty interior. Previous foreman let it go a bit before he retired. "But it's solid. Good bones, as they say." Jacob walked through the rooms, already imagining how he'd make it comfortable for when Emma visited. The larger bedroom would be his, but the smaller one had a window facing east that would be perfect for a little girl who loved mornings. "It's perfect," Jacob said. "Thank you for this opportunity, sir. Call me Miguel. And don't thank me yet. Wait until you've spent a few months shoveling cow shit and fixing fence line in the summer heat. Then decide if you want to thank me." The first weeks were physically demanding in ways that were different from bull riding, but no less exhausting. Jacob woke before dawn to help with feeding, spent long days on horseback checking fence lines and water tanks, learned the intricacies of herd management and ranch maintenance. His body, still recovering from the accident, protested the work at first. The headaches returned with a vengeance during the first week, forcing him to rest more than he wanted. But Miguel was patient, adjusting Jacob's workload without making it feel like pity, teaching him not just the practical skills of ranching, but the philosophy behind it. That good land management was about working with nature rather than against it. That patience and consistency mattered more than flash and drama. "You rodeo cowboys, you're all about the quick burst, the big moment," Miguel said one evening as they sat on the porch of the main house, watching the sunset paint the desert in impossible colors. "But ranching, real ranching, it's about the long game. About making decisions today that might not pay off for years. About building something that will last beyond your lifetime." "I'm starting to understand that," Jacob said. "The appeal of it, I mean." Tommy visited most weekends, helping with the heavier work and slowly taking over more of the ranch management as his father eased into a well-deserved semi-retirement. The 3 of them fell into an easy rhythm, each understanding their role, each contributing what they could. The riding clinics started in November. Word spread through the local community that the Rodriguez Ranch was offering lessons for kids interested in rodeo sports, taught by a former professional bull rider. Jacob had been nervous about this aspect of the job, unsure if he could teach something he'd been forced to give up, unsure if he even wanted to be around that world anymore. The first clinic drew 8 kids, ranging from 10 to 16, all of them with stars in their eyes and no real concept of what they were getting into. Jacob started them on the basics, Not bulls, not even steers, but barrel training and proper riding posture on calm horses. Before any of you get near a bull, you need to understand balance, you need to understand how to fall safely, and you need to understand respect, Jacob told them, standing in the training ring with a patient mare named Rosie. This isn't about being tough or proving something. It's about partnership with an animal, about reading their signals, about knowing when to push and when to back off. One kid, a cocky 15-year-old named Derek, clearly thought he was above the basics. When do we get to ride bulls? My dad says you were one of the best. Why are we wasting time on horses? Jacob walked over to Derek, meeting his eyes steadily. You see this scar? He pointed to the still pink line visible through his short hair where they'd performed the craniotomy. I got this because I thought I knew everything, because I pushed too hard, because I didn't respect the animal I was riding. I almost died. I can never ride bulls again. So before I let any of you near anything more dangerous than Rosie here, you're going to learn everything I wish someone had taught me about patience and respect, and knowing your limits. The kid's bravado deflated slightly. The other students listened with new attention. From that moment, the dynamics of the clinic shifted. Jacob wasn't just teaching them to ride. He was teaching them the lessons he'd learned the hardest way possible. Emma came for her first weekend visit in mid-November. Sarah dropped her off on Friday evening, staying long enough to inspect the house and make sure Jacob had actually child-proofed the place and stocked appropriate food. Her approval was grudging but genuine. It's nice here, she admitted, standing on the porch and looking out at the desert landscape. Quiet. Different from San Antonio. It's been good for me, Jacob said. The work, the space, the purpose. I feel like I'm building toward something instead of just chasing it. Emma explored the ranch with the enthusiasm only a 7-year-old could muster, delighted by everything. The chickens that she immediately wanted to name, the horses that let her pet their noses, even Cisco the donkey who tolerated her attention with grumpy dignity. Miguel showed her how to collect eggs from the chicken coop, and she carried the basket back to the house like it contained precious treasure. That first night, Jacob tucked Emma into the small bedroom he'd spent weeks preparing. He'd painted the walls a soft yellow, assembled a bed with a frame that looked like a stable, hung curtains printed with horses. Emma's stuffed animals lined the shelves he'd installed, and a night light cast gentle shadows across the ceiling. "Daddy," Emma said as he was about to turn off the lamp. "Yes, sweetheart. Are you happy now?" The question caught him off guard. He sat back down on the edge of her bed, considering how to answer honestly. "I'm getting there. I think for a long time I confused excitement with happiness, always chasing the next big thing instead of appreciating what I had. But yeah, I think I'm happier now than I've been in a long time." "Good. I like you better when you're happy. You smile more." She fell asleep quickly, exhausted from the day's adventures. Jacob stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching her sleep, and felt something settle in his chest, a sense of rightness, of being exactly where he was supposed to be. The weekends with Emma became a highlight of Jacob's new life. They fell into routines: Saturday morning pancakes, afternoons riding horses together, Emma on a gentle mare named Buttercup, evenings stargazing from the porch while Jacob pointed out constellations and made up stories about them. Emma talked about school, about her friends, about the little dramas and triumphs of second grade, and Jacob listened with an attention he'd never given her before. Sarah noticed the changes too. When she came to pick Emma up Sunday evenings, she'd linger longer each time, accepting coffee, asking about the ranch, gradually thawing from the ice that had existed between them since the divorce. "You know," she said one December evening as they watched Emma saying goodbye to the horses, "I spent years angry at you for putting bulls before your family. But I think maybe you had to lose everything before you could figure out what really mattered." "That doesn't excuse the years I wasted," Jacob said. "No, it doesn't. But it doesn't mean you can't do better going forward. And you are doing better, Jacob. I can see it. More importantly, Emma can see it." Christmas came, and with it a surprise. Sarah agreed to let Emma spend a full week at the ranch over winter break. Miguel's extended family came for Christmas dinner, filling the main house with laughter, food, and the kind of chaotic joy that only exists in large families. Emma was adopted immediately into the pack of Rodriguez children and grandchildren, running through the house with her new cousins, her happiness so bright it was almost tangible. Jacob helped Miguel cook traditional New Mexican dishes, learning techniques that had been passed down through generations. As he worked, Miguel shared stories about his own father, about learning the ranch business, about the hard times and good times, about legacy and what it meant to build something lasting. You know what the difference is between success and failure on a ranch? Miguel asked, stirring a pot of pozole. It's not talent or luck. It's showing up every single day, even when you don't feel like it, even when the work is hard and thankless. Consistency. Reliability. That's what makes a good rancher. And that's what makes a good father too. I'm trying, Jacob said. I know. And trying is enough as long as you keep doing it. The riding clinics expanded in the new year. Jacob's reputation brought in more students, and with Tommy's help, they built a proper training facility with mechanical bulls and safety equipment that Jacob insisted on even though it significantly cut into their profit margins. I'm not having another kid end up like me because we cut corners, he said firmly when Tommy questioned the expense. If we're going to do this, we do it right. They also started requiring all students to take a safety and responsibility course before they could advance to actual bull riding. Jacob taught these classes personally, showing videos of injuries, sharing his own story in uncomfortable detail, making sure every young rider understood the reality of what they were getting into. Some kids dropped out after the reality check, deciding rodeo sports weren't for them. But the ones who stayed were serious, dedicated, and most importantly safe. By spring, the Rodriguez Ranch Rodeo School had earned a reputation for producing skilled riders who understood not just how to stay on a bull, but how to compete responsibly. Derek, the cocky kid from the first clinic, became one of Jacob's star students. He'd taken the lessons to heart, developing into a thoughtful rider who balanced ambition with caution. When he won his first junior competition in March, he sought out Jacob afterward. I wouldn't have made it 8 seconds without everything you taught me, Derek said, still breathless from his ride. About staying calm, reading the bull, knowing when to grip tight and when to let the motion happen. Thank you. Jacob felt a surge of pride that was different from anything he'd felt during his own riding career. This wasn't about his glory or his achievement. It was about passing something on, about helping someone else succeed while avoiding the mistakes he'd made. You did the work, Derek. I just pointed you in the right direction. I'm proud of you. Spring brought changes to the ranch. Miguel officially retired, turning over full management to Tommy while maintaining an advisory role. Jacob's position evolved into assistant manager, his knowledge of ranching finally matching his work ethic. He took on more responsibility, managing the books, dealing with feed suppliers, overseeing the hiring of seasonal workers for the spring cattle work. Sarah's visits became more frequent, often staying for dinner, gradually building a friendship with Jacob that had never really existed during their marriage. They'd been too young then, too focused on survival and Jacob's career to actually get to know each other as people. Now, without the pressure of marriage and with the common goal of co-parenting Emma successfully, they discovered they actually liked each other. I'm seeing someone, Sarah told him one April evening as they sat on his porch while Emma played with Cisco in the yard. His name is David, he's a teacher at Emma's school. I wanted you to hear it from me before Emma mentioned it. Jacob felt a complex swirl of emotions, surprise, a twinge of something that might have been jealousy, but mostly a genuine happiness for her. That's great, Sarah. Really. You deserve someone who shows up for you. He does. He's steady, reliable, present. All the things. She trailed off, but they both knew how that sentence ended. All the things I wasn't. You're different now. If we'd met now instead of when we were 22, maybe things would have worked out differently. Maybe. But then we wouldn't have Emma, and I can't imagine a world without her. Sarah smiled. Me neither. She really loves it here, you know. She talks about the ranch constantly, about Miguel teaching her Spanish and Tommy showing her how to rope fence posts, and you reading to her every night. You've built something good here, Jacob. As the seasons turned and summer approached, Jacob found himself settling into a rhythm that felt sustainable in a way his previous life never had. The work was hard but satisfying. The relationships were deep rather than superficial. The days had purpose beyond the next 8 seconds of glory. His health continued to improve. The headaches became rare, usually triggered only by extreme stress or lack of sleep. His balance fully returned. His cognitive function was back to normal, according to his 6-month follow-up with Dr. Chin. The scar on his head faded to a thin white line that his hair mostly covered. You've made a remarkable recovery, Dr. Chin said during that final checkup. Not just physically, but from what you've told me, mentally and emotionally as well. Whatever you're doing in New Mexico, keep doing it. I plan to, Jacob said. For the first time in my life, I actually want to see what happens next instead of just focusing on the immediate moment. Emma's 8th birthday in June was celebrated at the ranch with a Western theme. Miguel barbecued, Tommy organized a treasure hunt through the property, and Sarah stayed for the whole party, even bringing David to meet Jacob. The meeting was awkward but cordial, two men who loved the same people trying to figure out how to coexist peacefully. "Thank you for taking care of them when I couldn't," Jacob told David privately. "That's not sarcasm or bitterness. I mean it. Emma and Sarah deserve stability." David, a tall man with kind eyes and an easy manner, relaxed slightly. "Sarah told me about everything you've been through. The accident, the recovery, building this new life. That takes courage. Emma's lucky to have you as a father now." The party stretched into evening, fairy lights strung across the porch casting warm glows as the desert cooled. Emma opened presents with enthusiasm. New books, art supplies, and from Jacob, a beautiful leather saddle custom-made for her size, with her name tooled into the leather. "Now you're officially a ranch hand," Jacob told her as she traced the letters of her name with wondering fingers. "Which means you have to help with the morning feeding when you're here." "Really? I get to help for real?" "For real. Miguel says you've been ready for weeks, but I wanted to wait until your birthday to make it official." Emma threw her arms around him, the saddle forgotten for the moment. "This is the best birthday ever, Daddy. Thank you for not being in the hospital this time." The comment was innocent, but it hit Jacob with the force of recognition. He'd spent Emma's 7th birthday in the ICU, barely conscious, fighting for his life. A year ago, he'd been at rock bottom, his career over, his future uncertain, his relationship with his daughter strained almost to breaking. Now he was here, healthy and present, celebrating his daughter's birthday surrounded by people who'd become family. The contrast was staggering. As the party wound down and guests began to leave, Tommy pulled Jacob aside. "I've been thinking about next steps for the rodeo school. We've got enough students now that we could probably hire another instructor, expand the program. But I wanted to check with you first. Is this something you want to keep doing long-term? Or are you still figuring things out?" Jacob looked around at the ranch, at the desert landscape he'd come to love, at Emma showing David her new saddle, while Sarah laughed at something Miguel was saying. He thought about the students he was teaching, about Derek and the others who were learning not just to ride, but to do it safely and thoughtfully. He thought about the life he was building, brick by brick, day by day, with patience and consistency and showing up. "I'm in," he said firmly. "This is what I want to be doing. Let's expand the program, do it right, build something that lasts." Tommy grinned and clapped him on the shoulder. "Good. Because I already ordered the materials for a second training arena. Figured you'd say yes." Summer brought its own challenges. Scorching heat that made midday work nearly impossible, drought conditions that required careful water management, and the constant maintenance that a working ranch demanded. But it also brought growth. The rodeo school's reputation spread beyond New Mexico, drawing students from Arizona, Texas, even Colorado. Jacob found himself not just teaching riding, but mentoring young people through the same struggles he'd faced. The pressure to prove yourself, the temptation to push too hard, the difficulty of knowing when enough was enough. One particularly talented 16-year-old named Marcus, coincidentally sharing a name with Jacob's physical therapist, showed up in July with obvious gifts as a rider, but also obvious demons. He rode recklessly, took unnecessary risks, and brushed off correction with defensive anger that Jacob recognized all too well. After one session where Marcus had ignored safety protocols and nearly gotten trampled, Jacob pulled him aside. "Walk with me," he said, not making it a request. They walked out past the training areas, into the open desert where the heat shimmered off the ground in waves. Jacob waited until they were far enough from the others that they had complete privacy. "What are you running from?" Jacob asked bluntly. Marcus kicked at a rock, his jaw tight. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do. I know because I spent 15 years running from the same thing. Whatever it is that makes you feel like you're not enough unless you're risking everything, unless you're pushing past every reasonable limit, unless you're proving something to someone who probably isn't even paying attention." The kid's defensive posture cracked slightly. "My dad was a bull rider. Semi-pro, never made it to the big circuits. He died 3 years ago, heart attack at 42. His last words to me were be better than I was. So yeah, I'm trying to be better." Jacob felt the weight of those words, understood the impossible burden they created. "Your dad loved you, I'm sure. But that's a hell of a thing to put on a kid. Being better doesn't mean being more reckless or taking more risks. It means being smarter, safer, more thoughtful. It means surviving long enough to actually have a career. You don't understand. I understand completely. My dad told me to be somebody, and I interpreted that as permission to destroy myself chasing glory. It almost killed me. It cost me years with my daughter. It wrecked my marriage. And you know what? In the end, being somebody in the rodeo world didn't matter nearly as much as being a good father, a reliable friend, a person who shows up. That's what being better actually means. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the desert horizon. What if I can't be as good a rider if I'm not willing to risk everything? Then you won't be as good, and you'll have to make peace with that. But you'll be alive. You'll have knees that work when you're 40. You'll have a brain that functions properly. You'll be able to be there for the people who love you. That's the trade-off, Marcus. Only you can decide if it's worth it. The conversation seemed to sink in. Over the following weeks, Jacob watched Marcus slowly transform his approach. He still rode with passion and skill, but he tempered it with caution. He listened to instruction. He asked questions instead of assuming he knew everything. By August, he'd become one of the most promising students in the program, and more importantly, one of the safest. "Thank you," Marcus told Jacob at the end of the summer session. "For not giving up on me. For understanding. Just pass it forward," Jacob said. "When you're the experienced rider and some cocky kid shows up thinking they're invincible, remember this conversation and help them figure it out before they have to learn the hard way." Emma spent 2 weeks at the ranch in August, the longest visit yet. They fell into a comfortable routine: morning chores together, riding lessons in the cooler evening hours, dinner with Miguel and Tommy, bedtime stories on the porch under the stars. She was growing up so fast, losing her little kid roundness, becoming more thoughtful and complex in her understanding of the world. One evening, as they sat watching the sunset paint the desert in impossible colors, Emma asked a question that had clearly been on her mind. "Daddy, do you ever miss riding bulls?" Jacob considered the question honestly. "Sometimes I miss the excitement, the adrenaline, that feeling of being completely focused on one moment. But you know what I don't miss? The fear, the injuries, the being away from you all the time, the feeling that I was never quite good enough no matter how well I rode. So overall, no, I don't miss it. I like this life better." "Good. Because I like you better this way too. You're more here. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense, sweetheart. And you smile more. You used to smile like you were supposed to, like it was part of your job. Now you smile like you mean it." The observation was so astute, so mature for an 8-year-old, that Jacob felt his throat tighten with emotion. "When did you get so wise?" Emma grinned, the gap from her recently lost tooth visible. "I've always been wise. You just weren't paying attention before." She wasn't wrong. September brought the start of the fall session at the rodeo school, and with it, a surprise visitor. Jacob was working in the training arena, coaching a group of intermediate students, when he looked up and saw a familiar figure leaning against the fence rail. It took him a moment to place the weathered face, but then recognition clicked. It was Ray Thornton, one of the judges from the professional circuit, a man Jacob had known for over a decade. "Ray, what are you doing all the way out here?" Ray climbed down from the fence, approaching with the careful gait of someone whose body had taken its share of abuse over the years. "Heard about what you're doing here. Building a reputation for training riders the right way, with safety and smarts. Wanted to see it for myself." They walked away from the students, finding shade by the barn. Ray pulled out a thermos of coffee, always coffee, no matter the temperature, and poured 2 cups while Jacob waited for him to get to the point. "The circuit's changing," Ray said finally. "Too many injuries, too many close calls, too much insurance liability. The organizing committee is putting together new safety standards, new training requirements. They want to create a certification program for riders, prove they understand the risks, and know how to compete safely." "That's good," Jacob said. "Long overdue." "Agreed. And they're looking for people to help develop the curriculum and run the certification programs. People who know the sport from the inside, who've experienced both the highs and the lows, who understand what needs to change." "Your name came up." Jacob set down his coffee cup, stunned. "My name?" "You're exactly what they're looking for, Jacob. Former top-tier competitor, someone who paid the price for the old way of doing things, now successfully training the next generation with a focus on safety. Plus, you're young enough to relate to the riders but old enough to have credibility. It's a consulting position, not full-time, so you could keep the ranch work and the school here. But it would mean traveling to events, working with organizers, helping to shape the future of the sport." The offer was tempting in ways Jacob hadn't expected. A chance to return to the rodeo world, not as a competitor, but as someone who could actually make it better, safer, more sustainable for the next generation. A A chance to turn his mistakes into something meaningful. I need to think about it, Jacob said. Talk to Tommy and Miguel, make sure it wouldn't interfere with my responsibilities here. And I'd need to talk to Sarah, make sure it wouldn't affect my time with Emma. Fair enough. I'm not here for an answer today. Just wanted to plant the seed, see if you were interested. Think about it, talk to your people, give me a call when you decide. Ray stood, shaking Jacob's hand firmly. For what it's worth, I think you'd be perfect for it. The sport needs people like you, Jacob. People who learn the hard lessons and are willing to share them. After Ray left, Jacob sat for a long time in the shade, processing the unexpected offer. 6 months ago, he would have jumped at any chance to stay connected to professional bull riding. But now, with the life he'd built here, he wasn't sure how he felt about it. That evening, he brought it up with Tommy and Miguel over dinner at the main house. He laid out the offer, the potential benefits, and his concerns about overcommitting. Miguel listened carefully, then asked the question that cut to the heart of it. Do you want to do this because it would make you happy, or because it would prove something to your old world? Jacob didn't have an immediate answer. He sat with the question, turning it over in his mind. Finally, he said, I think I want to do it because it's a chance to make the sport better. To prevent other riders from ending up like me. That feels like it matters. Then there's your answer, Miguel said. As long as it doesn't pull you away from Emma or from your work here, I don't see why you couldn't do both. Tommy and I can handle things when you need to travel. And having your name associated with the ranch's rodeo school would probably be good for business anyway. Tommy nodded agreement. Plus, it might be good for you to stay connected to that world, just in a healthier way. Not competing, not risking yourself, but contributing something positive. The conversation with Sarah was more complicated. She listened to the offer with a furrowed brow, her initial reaction clearly skeptical. How much traveling would this involve? How often would you miss your weekends with Emma? Ray said maybe once a month during the season, 2 days at most. And I'd make sure to schedule around Emma's visits. This wouldn't come before her, Sarah. I promise you that. She studied him for a long moment, trying to read his sincerity. You've done so well this past year, Jacob. You've built a good life here, stable and healthy. I'm worried this is the beginning of slipping back into old patterns. So am I, Jacob admitted. Which is why I wanted to talk to you about it, why I'm being careful about how I approach it. But I think there's a difference between competing and consulting. I'm not chasing glory anymore. I'm trying to use what I learned to help others. And if they offer you a chance to ride again, even just for exhibition or demonstration, would you be able to say no? It was the critical question, the one that would determine whether this was truly a new chapter or just another version of the old story. Jacob met her eyes without flinching. I would say no. Not because I'm afraid, though part of me is. But because I finally understand that those 8 seconds aren't worth what they cost. I have something better now, a daughter who wants me around, work that matters, a future I'm actually excited about. I'm not risking that for anything. Sarah's expression softened. Okay, I believe you. But I'm holding you to that, Jacob. The first sign that this is pulling you back into unhealthy patterns, you walk away. Deal. Deal. He called Ray the next day and accepted the position. The first consultation was scheduled for late October, a 2-day trip to Fort Worth to work with the Safety Committee on developing training protocols. Jacob approached it with a mixture of nervousness and excitement, unsure how it would feel to be back in the rodeo world after a year away. The Fort Worth rodeo grounds were exactly as he remembered them, the smells, the sounds, the energy of competition. But walking through as a consultant rather than a competitor felt different. He wasn't preparing to risk his life. He was here to help prevent others from having to risk theirs unnecessarily. The safety committee meeting was intense but productive. Jacob shared his story in detail. The accident, the injury, the long recovery, the realization that the culture of the sport encouraged dangerous behavior. He showed them the scar on his head, made them understand the real consequences of the tough-it-out mentality that pervaded bull riding. We're asking these riders, many of them teenagers, to climb onto animals that can kill them, Jacob said to the room full of organizers and officials. The least we can do is make sure they're properly trained, properly equipped, and properly educated about the risks. Not to scare them away from the sport, but to make sure they can have long careers instead of short, brutal ones. His perspective, coming from someone who'd lived it rather than just observed it, carried weight. By the end of the 2 days, they'd outlined a comprehensive certification program that included mandatory safety training, proper equipment standards, and graduated progression through different levels of competition. Flying back to New Mexico, Jacob felt a sense of accomplishment that was different from any ribbon or buckle he'd ever won. He was making a difference, using his pain and mistakes to create something better. October melted into November, and with it came Emma's first school break since the fall semester started. She arrived at the ranch on a Friday afternoon, bouncing with excitement about a project she'd been working on. "We had to write about our heroes for school," she announced at dinner. "And I wrote about you, Daddy." Jacob set down his fork, genuinely surprised. "Me? Why?" "Because you made a mistake and almost died, but then you got better and you changed your whole life. You learned from your mistakes instead of just being sad about them. Miss Rodriguez says that's what heroes do. They grow and change and help other people grow and change too." She pulled out her essay, carefully written in the large, uncertain letters of second grade, and read it aloud. Jacob listened with a lump in his throat as his 8-year-old daughter described him as brave for admitting he was wrong, for starting over, for being there for her now even though he hadn't been before. "My hero is my daddy," Emma concluded, reading the final paragraph. "He teaches kids how to be safe when they ride bulls. He helps take care of horses and cows. He reads me stories and makes me pancakes. He used to do dangerous things, but now he does important things instead. I'm proud of him." The essay was simple, written with a child's straightforward honesty, but it shattered something in Jacob. Some last piece of armor he'd been carrying around, the idea that he'd failed too badly to ever really redeem himself. "Thank you, sweetheart," he managed to say. "That means more to me than you know." That night, after Emma was asleep, Jacob sat on his porch and let himself cry for the first time since the accident. Not from pain or fear or regret, but from gratitude. Gratitude that he'd survived, that he'd been given a chance to change, that he hadn't lost Emma completely during the years he'd been absent. Thanksgiving came, and with it, another invitation. Sarah asked if Jacob wanted to join them for dinner at her place, along with David and his family. It was a big step, acknowledging that they were building a new kind of family structure, one that included ex-spouses and new partners, and the complicated love that survived divorce. The dinner was surprisingly easy. David's parents were warm and welcoming, treating Jacob like just another guest rather than the failed husband who'd come before their son. Emma was clearly thrilled to have her father there, sitting between Jacob and Sarah at the table, completely content in a way she never had been when her parents were still married and miserable. After dinner, while Emma played with David's nieces and nephews, Sarah and Jacob found themselves alone in the kitchen, washing dishes side by side like they had 1,000 times during their marriage. "This is nice," Sarah said quietly. "All of us together, no drama, no tension. I never thought we'd get here." "Me neither. David seems like a good man." "He is. He's steady in all the ways you weren't. But he's also not as passionate, not as driven. Sometimes I miss that about you, the intensity, the focus, even when it was focused on the wrong things." Jacob dried a plate carefully. "You deserve steady, Sarah. You had enough intensity with me to last a lifetime."